Hello, and welcome to the third video in the verbal reasoning section of the UCAT My EdSpace series. I'm Eleanor. Today we're going to be focusing on free text questions from particularly the inference and deduction types of questions that appear in the free text question sets. I'm Eleanor. I'm one of the English teachers at My EdSpace. And I will be doing the verbal reasoning section of the UCAT resources because they follow quite an English literature / critical thinking way of analysing and finding answers. So if you've looked at the other two videos that I've recorded, you'll know some of this already. The free text question sets follow a similar format to the true, false and can't tell question sets. That's the other option of question set in the verbal reasoning section. They're based on the contents of a 250 to 400 word passage or the conclusions or inferences that can be drawn from it without any outside information. As you can see, it's the same setup every time, the passage on the left-hand side and the questions on the right. There are 11 question sets, 44 questions, 22 minutes for all the questions, for each question, so that breaks down to 28.6 seconds per question, which is not a lot. Time is your biggest opponent here in this section. The free text questions are usually 7 to 9 of the question sets on the verbal reasoning section, with 28 to 36 actual free text questions in total. It's asking you to complete a statement with the most logical or most correct ending phrase, or to answer the question from a series of full answers. It also is asking you to make a value judgment based on the information you're given in the passage and what you can logically conclude from this information. There are three sorts of types of questions that come up most frequently in the free text question sets. Today we're going to be looking at inference and deduction, and there will be separate videos on information retrieval and logical reasoning and evaluation. So what is an inference deduction question asking you to do? It's asking you to identify what logically follows from the information, even if not explicitly stated. So unlike information retrieval, which is slightly more straightforward, it's just looking for the information in the passage. You need to do some critical thinking here, as you're being asked to draw conclusions based on the information you're given. It's not about guessing or using your real world reasoning or knowledge. It's about making your conclusions based on the information that you're given and what you can conclude based on the evidence you have. Indeed, using real world information or knowledge is usually a pitfall of this type of question, because it relies on you using information that's outside of the passage, which is not what the examiner is asking you to do. So what kinds of questions fall into this category? Broadly, the idea is that they are asking what's implied. So not what is stated or what details are in the text, but rather what is suggested about a topic based on the information, or what's suggested about an author's perspective or tone or opinion based on the information in the passage. So these are the types of questions they may ask you to make value judgments that look like this: the success or failure of the subject material, a writer's opinion, stance or viewpoint, what can be inferred about the subject material or the relationships between two different things, which of the following an author might agree with, how an author or subject views the overall role or views X, what the writer is implying about the subject, and the overall tone of a piece regarding a specific topic. Some common pitfalls for this type of question is paraphrasing and synonyms. So if you're using your keywords and scanning the passage rather than reading it, using your keywords to guide you, you want to be mindful that sometimes, especially with these inference or deduction questions, in the question itself, it will be rephrased, it will be slightly rejigged in terms of the words used, or it may be paraphrased, so maybe sort of summarized using different words. So you'll want to be mindful of this and keeping an eye out for synonyms of your keywords as you read, because they may intentionally not appear in the question itself. There also will be a dispersion of keywords often, so a later statement in the passage may contradict the previous keyword statement. This is testing to see if you will stop in your tracks when you first see the keyword and then make all of your conclusions and your decision based on that, rather than skimming the passage carefully and ensuring that nothing else in the passage contributes to what this question is asking you to decide. Same with mitigation and contradiction. One may appear to contradict the other in terms of paragraphs or content across the passage. If you only read one, you will be guided to the wrong answer, and that is on purpose. We don't want that to happen. Similarly, correlation is not causation, so you've got to take the information you have and ensure that you're only concluding things that you know can be concluded to. So the only concluding things that you're guided towards concluding. So the famous kind of phrase to remember correlation is not causation is that all squares are rectangles, but all rectangles are not squares. So that means that because a square is a type of rectangle, it fits under the umbrella of rectangles. So every square, a type of rectangle, is a rectangle itself, but all rectangles are not squares. There are lots of different kinds of rectangles. Squares are one, but just because something is a rectangle doesn't mean it is also a square. This can also be rephrased, particularly for maths proofs, as if x means y, then y does not necessarily mean x. So it's that this relationship is not purely symbiotic. It's not if one, then the other, and if the other, then one. Okay? You want to look for bridging phrases if you have two statements that appear to be linked, because if they're not, they may just be next to each other, and your brain in reading it may guide you to thinking those two sentences are linked together because they're next to each other. They seem to follow one another. However, your examiner will signpost you to links between two pieces of information, or any cause-effect relationship using a bridging phrase like due to this, because of this, however, as a result, consequently, which will suggest definitively that these two sentences are linked and that we know the relationship between them. Similarly with juxtaposition, are there two statements that seem linked but you don't have any proof that they absolutely are? These are quite insidious questions, so we'll take a look at some of them as well. Are there any gaps in information that require conclusions? So is there, if you've thinking back to the true, false, can't tell, is there something that doesn't seem to be quite one or the other, but you can make a conclusion based on the different pieces of evidence you have in front of you? And then again, avoiding outside information, it's often there to distract you. Let's take a look at an example of one of these questions, and we're going to model the strategies for reading this that we would do for the exam. So we're not going straight into reading the passage, but instead we are using our keywords and our question in order to skim the passage. So, question 1, it asks you, the author's view on deep sea exploration can best be described as, strongly opposed to all forms of exploration, supportive but cautious about environmental risks, indifferent to its outcomes, or entirely focused on its economic potential. So we would be looking, and this is a great question to start with because we're looking kind of for the tone of this passage on the economic appeal. So as we look, we're going to be looking not only for the tone words, but also for the content to all forms of exploration, to environmental risks. Is that going to be popping up a lot? To outcomes and to economic potential. Let's be mindful as we're skimming through what we see, okay? So as we're skimming through, we're seeing advances in technology, okay? So that would be a kind of exploration. to observe marine life. We're talking about ecosystems that thrive. Oh my goodness, there we are. Ecosystems that thrive. We're looking at supporters of deep sea research, biodiversity, medical or industrial breakthroughs. That sounds like kinds of technology or outcomes. However, we're looking at words like concerned being raised about the impact of exploration on fragile habitats. Notice the bridging phrase here, however. Expeditions linked to deep sea mining. Okay, so that might be somewhat environmental there. We're seeing critics fear that even limited disturbances could have long-term effects. That seems pretty serious. That doesn't seem like progress for the sake of progress or indifference, does it, if we've got fear, for example, as one of those ideas. Now we're looking at regulations and enforcement, so it seems like there's some concern for the effects. Again, that's driving us quite away from C and driving us quite away from D as well. We're also talking about the interest in the resources. Pressure is mounting for stronger legal frameworks to balance significant study and conservation. Okay, so it seems like this is an ongoing issue in which it's being reported that they need more information and more regulation in this form. So let's take a look at the answers now. Strongly opposed to all forms of exploration. Now, this doesn't seem right immediately, right? Because there's not a lot of tone words or words in general suggesting that they're strongly opposed to this. It's much more kind of nuanced and careful in the language, quite balanced, not necessarily in a positive or negative way, but it certainly doesn't seem strongly opposed to all forms of exploration. Indeed, it points out the benefits. So let's cross out that first one. Because we don't think that's right. Supportive but cautious about environmental risks. They've mentioned the environment quite a few times with ecosystems that thrive, fragile habitats, impact of exploration, deep sea mining, long-term effects, regulations and enforcements and conservation. That seems like there are quite a lot of environmental risks there. And supportive it seems a little bit extra if we're thinking about there's not a huge amount of passion for the subject, but then it's qualified. Supportive but cautious seems quite balanced. Cautious would make sense with that critic's fear and looking at the pressure mounting to balance scientific study and conservation, and looking at the supporters and the critics both in this second paragraph and what each of them are thinking in terms of this development in technology and exploration. Indifferent to its outcomes. This one might give us some pause because it certainly is focusing on the outcomes, and it's also certainly not impassioned, either strongly opposed or entirely focused. So these two, I would say, are our closest. Let's leave them both for now and move on to D, and then see if we can eliminate D and then make our choice. So D is entirely focused on its economic potential. We've seen almost nothing about economic potential except for the idea of industrial breakthroughs, and except for mining, which we would imagine might be lucrative. And we also have something about resources extraction and interest, but we do not have any more information about economic potential in particular. So we're going to say this is a no. We're also noticing this very specific word, entirely focused, similarly to strongly opposed, is not mitigating. It's very definitive word, as we've pointed out in a previous video. So it's something that closes off options. If it's entirely focused on the economic potential, then it wouldn't be talking very much about anything else other than the economic potential, and this does, so we can cross this out. Similarly, with strongly opposed, it seems like there are some positives that the writer has pointed out, so we can't say that they're strongly opposed to all forms of exploration. Let's look back at B and C. Supportive but cautious about environmental risks. It seems like that's a pretty good answer, especially because it's a more tentative answer than indifferent to its outcomes. It seems quite concerned about outcomes with this critic's fear here again, and with this pressure here and the need for internal regulation seems to be something that they're interested in because they say they remain underdeveloped. So we're going to cross out C as the incorrect idea for this idea of balance here that's presented in the passage, because it's more that it's supportive but cautious about the risks of deep sea exploration. So we end up with B. Let's take a look at another question. So this is very similar to the overarching question here for inference and deduction questions. What does the passage imply here? So let's take a look. A, that deep sea mining is currently banned worldwide. If we take a look back in the passage, we can see that when it says banned worldwide, if we scan back over, we have a lot of tentative language here. Supporters of deep sea argue, concerns have been raised, critics fear, but that international regulations remain undeveloped, most enforcement relying on voluntary agreements, and that the pressure is mounting for stronger legal frameworks. So clearly it's not banned worldwide. So we're going to say that the first option is a no. International laws governing the deep sea are not fully developed. That sounds right, because not fully developed, if we're using our keyword, we find underdeveloped here. Not exactly the same word, but certainly a synonym for not fully developed. And we can see that this is still an ongoing issue. Pressure is mounting for stronger legal frameworks again, but we do not have them yet. We also, if we're looking at a secondary keyword, that international here gives us more confirmation that this seems like the right answer, because we see that there are international regulations here looking for more governance. Question C, all deep sea expeditions are conducted illegally. Again, this seems like an overstep because we can't see the word illegally anywhere. We can't see conducted illegally anywhere. We know it's least explored. We know that there are concerns. We know that there are regulations being underdeveloped, but there's nothing about them being illegal currently. Also noticed this definitive word here, all of them are conducted illegally. That's not the case, because we can see that these are ongoing from many different groups doing deep sea expeditions. So this is almost definitely wrong here. And then D, scientific exploration has no environmental risks. Here, no, again, is a very definitive word. If we're looking for risks, we know there's quite a lot of risky language here. Concerns have been raised. Critics fear. Fragile habitats here. The impact of exploration. Deep sea mining. Long-term effects. And conservation down here at the bottom. It seems like there are several environmental risks. So that's a no, leaving us with our answer of B as our correct answer. Question 3, on the same passage. The author would most likely agree that future deep sea research should. So you'll notice two parts of this question here that stand out. First of which is most likely agree, that we're expected to conclude that the author, who we know is cautious but seemingly supportive of deep sea exploration as long as it has more regulations, that they are most likely agree that future deep sea research should. So we're looking for going forward what deep sea research should look like. Proceed without restrictions to speed up discoveries. This doesn't seem right immediately based on what we know of this text. Without restrictions, this whole paragraph here is about restrictions being developed. So I would say that this one is a pretty good indicator that that's not the case, because this is so neutral. There is pressure mounting for more restriction and international regulations being described as underdeveloped rather than perfectly fine right now, or an inhibitor to speeding up discovery. So this seems like a no so far. B, being banned until all ecosystems are mapped. Mapped, we've not seen any information about anything being mapped. Indeed, it seems like we need, the author is looking for stronger legal frameworks to balance scientific study, in other words, the discoveries, and the conservation, the ecosystems. But we see nothing about mapping here at all as we scan the passage again. So this one seems pretty incorrect, particularly this banned and all, again, quite harsh words. We don't see anything about it being banned. Indeed, it seems to be going the opposite direction. And all ecosystems are mapped is another very harsh term that seems unlikely with these restrictions being underdeveloped currently. C, be balanced with stronger conservation regulations. We see conservation down here in our last sentence. We also see regulations as the topic here of this last paragraph, and we see this word balanced, such a neutral and helpful word, because unlike the other two, and particularly that B, this allows for slightly more nuance, right? It seems like two things need to be true at the same time, which indeed seems to be the case here as well. And then this looks like maybe it's our right answer, but let's check D just to be sure. Focus only, again, a definitive word, on finding industrial materials. Now, the only time we had industrial materials is here in this second paragraph, where supporters of deep sea research are arguing for it, but that doesn't mean it's true. And that certainly doesn't mean it's the opinion of the writer, because then they use this bridging word here to talk about the concerns of the environment and the critics with their long-term effects focus on deep sea mining, deep sea exploration. So this is indicating a no for D and guiding us towards C, being balanced with stronger conservation regulations. Question 4, and the last in this question set. In describing the future of deep sea exploration, the author is, so again, we're looking about the future of deep sea exploration. A, certain it will lead to medical breakthroughs. Again, we're seeing in this second paragraph, supporters argue that it may lead to medical breakthroughs. That doesn't mean it's going to happen. So very much like the can't tell in your true, false, can't tell questions. This is something that may be the case, but we don't know. So with question 1, we're going to say that that is, or question A, we're going to say that's a no, going ahead. B, aware of its potential but mindful of the need for regulation. Okay, we saw quite a lot of potential in the different people's different presentations of breakthroughs and concerns, And this word, mindful of the need for regulation. We said in the last question, this is all about regulation here. And here we have our potential. So this seems, in addition to these ideas here, there's quite a lot of potential here that's balanced with this later regulation section. So this seems right, but let's move on and check the others. Strongly against, notice this adverb, strongly against continued exploration in any form. This definitive words again guiding us that this doesn't sound right because this is such a balanced piece. Guide strongly against continued exploration in any form. That doesn't seem right because here we're talking about the need to develop regulations, to look at the interest in resource extraction growing, pressure mounting for stronger legal frameworks, and the need for that to continue scientific study and conservation. So again, this seems like this is not true, particularly because of the focus of this potential earlier in the passage. And then again, focus solely on commercial resource extraction. This seems wrong, right? Because the only time we've had anything about commercial resource extraction is here, and the fact that it is growing. But that's not the concept for the whole paragraph. It's much more about the potential in medical and industrial breakthroughs, about the ecological concerns, about the ecosystems that thrive without sunlight, suggesting that there may be new things to discover here, but certainly not that it should only concentrate on deep sea mining or commercial resource extraction. So that leads us to B as our answer. Some tips and tricks for this section. You'll want to practice timed sessions. You need to get into the habit of operating in timed conditions so that you get used to how quick these timings are. You want to read the statements before reading the passage. This will help you notice keywords and give you a lens through which you will notice, it will stand out to you more the information that you are looking for, and that will save you time. You need to make educated guesses through the process of elimination. So you need to cross out the ones you know are wrong and then work through which ones you think could be right. Any elimination you do improves the probability that you're getting the right answer, even if you do have to end up making an educated guess. It is important that if you run out of time, you do try to answer every question, because there's no negative marking in the verbal reasoning section. So that means that you are not punished for answering questions wrong, but you don't get any points at all if you don't answer the question. So it is beneficial for you to choose an answer even if you haven't had the time to fully go through the whole process of deciding and being certain that it's the right answer. A helpful tip for this as well is to use the flag and review flagged questions features to your advantage. They're on the screen at all times to avoid losing valuable time on the tricky questions or reviewing the questions you know are right. So rather than flicking through 44 questions, including questions you know you absolutely got right, the review flagged questions will allow you to go back just to the questions you flag, and you can flag, as you can see above, using Alt-F, so that you can go back just to the 2, 3, 4 questions that you are uncertain about and use any time you have extra to go through those. You also want to use the time you gained on your true, false, can't tell questions to use for the free text questions. Because they take a little bit more time, you've got a little bit more to do in them, because you have to either complete the sentence with 4 options, or you have to read all of the ends of the statements and decide which one is appropriate. So it takes a little bit more time, so you want to use that time to your advantage. That's it for this video. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out, and I will see you in the next video of the verbal reasoning section. Bye for now.